Hello, I'm Jonathan from Boredom Sated.
And I'm Boris from Boredom Sated.
Today we are going to continue our creature comparison with something that I can't believe we completely forgot about earlier, the skeleton.
I I know, especially when we were doing all of those horror, the vampire, the mummy. I can't believe we totally forgot the skeleton.
I don't understand how that happened.
Yep.
The history of the skeleton. Now, obviously, everyone knows, well, the history of the skeleton is a skeleton inside the body, and we saw the skeleton when you got dead people. Well, obviously, that's going to be where you start. However, the personification of animated human skeletons started really during the Middle Ages. Because during the Middle Ages, in Western culture, the personification of death became basically the skeleton in the black robe. It was several kind of other concepts came from that, but that's where it really started in the Middle Ages. We also have early iconography of the skeletons, animated skeletons during your De los de la Muerte, your Day of the Dead, where you've got skulls symbolizing life in their familiar circumstances. Going on to what we think of really as the animated skeleton. Animated skeletons really started showing up in Gothic fiction in the beginning of the 20th century, in several early short stories. One of the earlier examples is a short story called Thurnley Abbey by Percival Landon. I'm getting this off of the Wikipedia page in case anyone wants to check that out. But there's a bunch of older stories of that. When you get to films and television, you obviously have one of the earlier ones being the depiction of skeletons in their wonderful animated form in The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
Yes.
And many, many movies since then. Of course, my favorites being Army of Darkness with all of that wonderful skeleton madness.
Right. And we will be discussing how Pathfinder lets you do the crazy Army of Darkness madness with skeletons.
So, obviously, skeletons, the way most of us think of skeletons, especially the basic skeleton, is this is something you fight at level 1 or level 2 when you are in a basic D&D game, or if you're in a video game where you've got to be in like a dark, dank dungeon. Skeletons are well known to be low-level monsters. And guess what? Both Pathfinder and 2nd Edition, the Pathfinder 2nd Edition and D&D did that to the T.
Yep. Although they did start adding other higher level skeletons all the way across, but in this game we'll just be describing the base because most of the other things that are increased are in line with their increased level. Their to hit bonuses, all of those goes down, but the base skeleton gives you all the capabilities that all of them can do, just with higher rolls, bonuses.
Yeah. So let's start with the CR. The CR is exactly what you would expect it to be. Lowest possible CR. In Pathfinder 2, it's CR -1. In D&D, it's a CR 1/4. Although I do think there's a creature that's a CR 1/8. But let's just leave it at that.
Right. In Pathfinder, it's similar. They begin with creature -1 with forward, which is really designed so you need to have multiples when you're fighting a party.
Exactly. And you expect skeletons to be something that you're not going to fight only one of. When I think of skeleton, I generally will automatically go to skeleton horde.
Yep. Definitely. Even though you do have the increase in the creature levels that you can add, and maybe have one if the party's lower fighting a higher level creature, it's still the basic idea you have is multiple creatures at a lower level than the party.
Let's talk about the one major difference between the Pathfinder version and the D&D version. And that's
Yes.
based on one of the common concepts that we think of when we've got to take on a skeleton is you need a bludgeoning weapon. In previous editions, you need a bludgeoning weapon because if you try to stab a skeleton, you got to be real accurate because there's nothing to stab. It's just the skeleton. If you want to cut a skeleton, it's more difficult. So cutting a skeleton is usually more difficult. So in previous editions, they gave resistance to everything but bludgeoning, generally, or they gave some sort of DR. In Pathfinder 2, we'll go over that in a second, but I'm going to start with the 5th edition version. And in the 5th edition version, instead of making it so that you are just worse if you're not using a bludgeoning weapon, they gave it weakness to bludgeoning, a vulnerability. So you deal double damage when you're doing bludgeoning instead of going the other way. Now, this makes it so that the skeletons are one-shottable if you've got a nice big club, because the AC, the hit points on a skeleton in this edition is only 13. Now you're generally at level 1. You're not going to do 13 points of damage in a single hit, although if you're wielding a nice big two-handed weapon, you might. But because of the fact that it's damage vulnerability to bludgeoning, you take a hammer, which does a d6 or a d8, roll well, you could very easily kill the skeleton in one blow. For damage immunities, it is immune to poison, which makes sense because it's a skeleton, it's dead. You can't really poison something that's dead. And it is immune to the conditions of being exhausted and poisoned because, amazingly enough, it's still undead.
Yep. And so in Pathfinder 2, they went the other way. They gave it resistance to everything other than bludgeoning. But they also lowered the number of hit points it has. So it only has 4 hit points, but it has resistance to everything of 5, which really makes it, in some cases, the non-fighter types might not be doing any points of damage to it on a hit.
Yeah, so it's got a resistance to cold, fire, and lightning 5, and then also to slashing and
piercing.
Piercing 5. So if you are not using a bludgeoning weapon at level 1, in general, you're going to be doing like a D8 plus 4, or a D6 plus 4, or D10 plus 4, something like that. So if you roll low, you might do nothing.
Right.
And if you're using one of those 3 common elements, you're probably not going to do a lot of damage either. So you have to either use a different element type, a bludgeoning weapon, or roll high to be able to hurt them at all. But if you do hurt them, there's a good chance you're going to take them out in one solid swing.
Right. And but to counteract that, the skeletons do get abilities in the Pathfinder 2. So some of their abilities, and I just want to go over them because they are in line with, like you said, Army of Darkness, which is definitely one of our favorite movies. So I'll just quickly go over those skeleton abilities that you can add on top of the skeleton. Bloody. The skeleton is covered and dripping with blood and gains fast healing equal to its level, which is interesting. Creature -1 fast healing, but I assume
at any of these abilities, it automatically raises their level by a few.
Right.
Because that's the point. Because do remember what he's mentioning right now. These are abilities you can add to your skeletons to make it so that you can fight against higher level skeletons and still have it be an entertaining fight.
Right.
Because obviously, what if you want to be doing an undead campaign? The skeletons are going to get bigger, the skeletons are going to get stronger as the undead creature or whatever creature is raising them has put more magical energy into their creation.
Right. The next ability is Collapse. The skeleton is critically hit. It's a reaction. The skeleton collapses into a pile of bones, and the attack deals only normal damage, not critical. The skeleton can reform in a standing position as an action, but until it does, it is immobilized and flat-footed. So, in other words, it can avoid a critical hit.
I'm just imagining a cartoon where you hit it and it just goes and like into a tiny pile.
Yeah. Then the explosion death, which we definitely saw in Army of Darkness, When the skeleton is destroyed, its bones scatter and explode as the necromantic energy holding it together is released. Adjacent creatures take 1d6 slashing damage per 2 levels with a basic reflex save, which is interesting. And then the final, which is what we saw when they were catapulting the skeleton skulls. The skeleton removes its skull and throws it, making a jaw attack with a range of 20 feet. It then attempts to demoralize each foe within 10 feet of the target. The head bounce, rolls, and even flies back, returning to the skeleton at the start of the next turn. The skeleton is blinded until then.
Oh, that's just wonderful and lovely.
Yes.
So, again, you can put these on the base skeletons. Also, there are skeleton war horses. That's also in both editions. For the next size up, you've got the Minotaur skeleton in 5th edition and the Giant skeleton in Pathfinder 2. Pathfinder 2 also has a skeleton champion, which I'm actually a really big fan of the way it fights because it's a really good way to introduce the shield block reaction because it's a skeleton with a shield. So you can do a lot of fun stuff with that when like trying to teach your party about the early level abilities of monsters. And of course, skeletons are in general a nice, simple fight that you can put at your party to make it so that you have something to be able to do relatively early on and fight against something that you know is mindless and coming at you. Or you can give them personality just for fun, just for, the fun of it.
Right. So, I mean, in this case, overall, I think they're pretty much equal, with their abilities between 5th edition and Pathfinder 2. And, of course, Pathfinder 2 adding those skeleton abilities and the interesting twist with the resistance, I think does take the advantage in this case.
I'm not even going to include the additional stuff because Pathfinder 2, and for a lot of especially early level monsters, they love to do that. But I much prefer the resistance over the weakness, over the vulnerability. And so I like the Pathfinder 2 version better because I like the way they did the resistances and immunities much better than the way that they decided to do it in D&D. However, either way, it's a low-level fight. It's something that you can throw a bunch of them at your party, and they can feel like heroes. And that's something that I always really like to do, especially at low level.
Right. Well, so that's our summary of the skeletons. Please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Tell us about some interesting fight you had with skeletons. We're always interested in stories. Let us know what monster you would like us to do next. And I'm Boris from Board and Sated.
I'm Jonathan. Hope you guys have a great day and see you next time.